Welcome everybody to the OII. There's a few faces around here I don't recognise, which is rather nice. I'm Vicky Nash, I'm Policy and Research Officer here at the OII, and we've got a few other OII people around the table. I might actually get people to introduce themselves in a minute, seeing as we're sort of quite a small group. You can say who you are and where you're from. We've been very excited to bring Bill Thompson in today. He's been a friend of mine for a few years now. I can't remember when we first met. I think it was some other spurious event being held in Oxford. But
yes, yeah.
Some academic focus. No, I think it was a community and mobility event a while ago.
Yes.
But Bill's one of those very impressive people that can straddle a lot of spheres. Ellie, you said to me, well, I don't have any boundaries, is one way of describing it.
I'm a dilettante.
A dilettante, okay. But you also boldly say that you're a new media pioneer, so as well as being, sing your own song at the same time. But Bill's worked in journalism obviously for a long time. He's been working at The Guardian. He was head of new media there. He writes for the BBC. He has something called Bill Blog, which is both a personal blog but also has snippets frequently on the BBC website. Contributes to lots of other things. I know I've certainly seen you in the Register. I don't think I've seen you in the New Statesman, but I'll look out for that.
I write for the Statesman.
And you're also on the World Service and other radio TV programmes. But also, as I said, straddling the other boundary, teaches online journalism at City University. So it's very, very well placed to be talking about the topic we've chosen today, which is looking at the impact of the internet and new media on journalism and news reporting. So Bill, if you don't mind, we can go around the table and introduce ourselves, and then we'll hand over to you.
Well, it's very nice to be here. I'm a friend of the Oxford Internet Institute, as I seem to be a friend of lots of different places. As I say, I don't really have a home. I'm based in Cambridge, and I'm in Oxford this weekend because my partner is a children's writer, and there's a big conference of children's writers taking place at St Catherine's over the weekend, and so I basically decided to come along with her and see what else I could do while I was here. So it's perfect that this opportunity is here. I'm here because I'm a recovered computer programmer, by and large. Being a recovered computer programmer is like being a recovered alcoholic. You never finally can say you've given up. But I haven't written a line of code for 3 months, and I think that's doing pretty well. I'm also an escaped senior consultant from a very large technology firm called Hoskins, and the resigned head of new media from The Guardian. In 95 and 96, I set up The Guardian website and got things started, though I can't claim very much credit for the wonderful beast it is today, except for the fact I was the one who beat it into Alan Rusbridge's head that the website was about brand extension, not money. And he listened, which I'm very grateful. These days I'm a freelance writer, a bit of a pundit. My friends call me a media tart because I can be seen on lots of different radio and television shows. I edit a website called Working for an MP, which is for people who work for MPs. And I teach at City University, as Vicky said. And what I want to do today is to have a seminar, not so much a lecture. That's for two reasons. The first is that we all have a lot to contribute, and the second is this is not a fixed, decided issue. It's changing very rapidly. And for me to stand up here and pontificate about what's happening and claim that I understand it all would be foolish, would be hubristic. I think it would be much more interesting if we actually discuss some of the issues that arise. And what I want to do is to seed our discussion by talking for a bit about some of my observations and some things I've noticed. So please do dive in at any time with questions or sort of information from your own experience, or indeed sort of points where you think I'm getting it wrong. I think one of the fascinating things about this whole area is how quickly things are changing. It's also an area that everyone is picking up on. We are not alone. So what I want to do is look at the phenomenon, what's in the name, the term citizen journalism, some history from pamphlets to participatory journalism, why this is not as new as some of the more excitable commentators think it is, look at what makes it possible, and then move on, and perhaps this is something we can all discuss, to ask what it might mean both for the trade, for those of us who are working journalists, and for the people, and actually for the internet generally, because I think this carries with it, this whole phenomenon carries with it implications for the way we will build out the network to reach the next 5 billion, by my current obsession, how we'll reach those and what the shape of the network in future. So what are those wider implications? As luck would have it, even today, Amy Garron is speaking at the New York Press Association on the same topic. She's talking about what is citizen journalism and why should news organisations care. So yeah, we're definitely not alone. Although I looked through the abstract of her talk, and it's filled with discussion of embracing and leveraging audience contributions in order to re-envision your organization's role. So I don't think this is the sort of seminar I'd actually want to be at. It largely seems to be about how the New York Times can do to news gatherers and people like that what CBS tried to do to The Clash in 1977, and I don't think we should have any part of that sort of thing. But there is a lot of it about, and I just did some quick surfing. Here's Bayosphere, which is Dan Gillmor's attempt at citizen journalism in the Bay Area. The BBC has been doing a vast amount. I quite like this Your Pictures of Scotland site, where you're invited to send in your best pictures of Scotland. Some nice stuff there. 5 Live does a lot. They have on Up All Night. Are any of you insomniacs like I am? Do you listen to Up All Night? They have sort of quite a big, sort of weighty section every week now talking about blogs and what's happening in this whole area and trying to bring it into the mainstream. And I think that's quite interesting. And of course, there's OhmyNews in both English and Korean, which is quite a fascinating experiment. Well, I think it's more than an experiment. Quite a fascinating innovation in the ways you can do journalism. So, what's actually going on? And here I want to get away from the PowerPoint because, as they say, power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely, and talk a bit more. So I'm going to put that away. It might even turn itself off. Oh, yes, it did. And turn to my notes. We all experience the media, some of us help to create it, and we all participate in this discourse, this ongoing conversation. And I think for many people inside media organisations, it was probably the London bombings that really crystallised thinking in the UK about what was happening with this phenomenon. When people started to realise the importance of contributions from the general public in terms of photographs and videos and eyewitness reports. And it fascinated me to see what was happening at the time because it's not in itself a new phenomenon. It has been going on for some time. And part of what seems to be happening is the desire to give something a name in order to put boundaries around it and then control it more effectively. So we hear people talking about citizen journalism and grassroots journalism and participatory journalism. I mean, I don't know if any of you have heard any other terms being used. There are lots of them around. So user-contributed content is discussed, whatever. Does anybody come across any other names for it?
Public journalism.
Public journalism, yeah, that's one I've forgotten about. I think we're going to see this for quite a while. And part of the problem is that none of them, I think, will really stick because none fully encompasses what's actually going on. I'm actually tempted to propose that we actually try to rehabilitate an old word and call these people amateurs, but get away from the derogatory implications that has. Because, well, in some contexts, I mean, my weblog has, it's called the Bill blog because it alliterates and some blogs are journalism. Some of what I do is professional journalism and some of what I do is amateur journalism. And it's, I don't get paid for it. I don't do it within a media structure. So I wouldn't object. Demos has come up with this term, the pro-ams, sort of professional amateurs, the serious amateurs, as they call it. They wrote a pamphlet about it a few months ago. And I think there's a lot to be said for coming back to that old term and actually trying to strip it of years of accretions of it being sort of a negative way to describe people. Because amateurism, in the strict sense of the word, is a good thing. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, given that we just won the Ashes, maybe we should distinguish between the gentlemen and the players again, sort of do something like that. But obviously that wouldn't work, given the breakdown of who's actually doing this sort of stuff. The material has been used in these ways for many years, though. And again, there's this serious lack of historical perspective when people start writing about it. I think Dan Gillmor is partly guilty of it in terms of trying to boost up a movement that he wants to be a leader of. But other reporters and writers and commentators show an unwillingness to look back and see what's been going on. I mean, amateur video recordings, things like the Concorde crash several years ago, have been around and were fed into the news system. They were just not so available. And I'm sorry? Yes, there's a Zapruder movie. Good example, yes, the film of Kennedy being shot. But even before that, family photographs of missing relatives or murdered individuals, they are the staple of the news pages. They always have been. It's only that these have been fed into the system through approved channels, taken by journalists, stolen from mantelpieces, rather than offered as emails from cell phones, that people claim something different is going on. And major events, particularly the Asian tsunami, again the London bombings, now what's happened in Louisiana with Katrina, are merely a difference in quantity. The fact is there is more and more of this available, but I'm not sure that they mark what some commentators would claim to be a difference in quality. I don't think there's any real substantial difference in terms of that taking content, and I think that can be overstated. There is different stuff happening, however, outside the way that mainstream media and existing news organisations are using this material. And that's perhaps where it's more appropriate to use the term citizen journalism, for people doing it for themselves. And that's the evolution, that's what's come out of the blogosphere and the ease with which people can publish online. Now, back in the 16th century, as you know, anyone could be a pamphleteer. All you actually needed was something to write about and access to a willing publisher, and you could distribute your words. And the newspaper industry within Britain and throughout the rest of the world evolved from that, and to many, to some extent, is very different, very similar to the way blogging operates today. London is widely available, widely distributed. They influence the political thinking. They rabble-rouse. They sort of campaign for issues that were important. And newspapers evolved from that environment with editors who were willing to take whatever gossip and scandal and other reports they could get from their contacts, package them up in a way that would entertain and inform their readers, and try to make an honest or a dishonest penny about it. Andrew Marr's biography, or his tale of his life in journalism, My Trade, is a very good history of this time, and he points out something which I hadn't been aware of, which is that the correspondents in newspapers were originally that. They were people who wrote letters to the newspaper, perhaps because they were posted to outposts of empire, whatever, or had been present at some battle or observed something interesting. They wrote them in and they were published. And the special correspondents were special because they were actually paid. So there is a historic tradition, definitely in this country, of taking material from people who are there, who have a point of view or who have some information, and reproducing it and making it available to a wider public. And I don't think there's that much difference between a lot of what is happening now in terms of the way existing news organisations, newspapers, magazines, radio, TV, and indeed sort of websites are trying to deal with this user-generated content and what's happening in the blogosphere and what happened then. I think we can learn some lessons about the way things were incorporated and made to fit with the evolving sort of journalistic practice and the business practices of what became the newspapers. So given that we have a history of journalism which has both assimilated and accommodated these sorts of changes, it should be possible for today's journalists, both us as working journalists and also the organisations that employ us and print our words or sort of broadcast our shows, to both accommodate and assimilate. That is, to change in response to what is being offered by those who are able to write and publish themselves, and also to take in what is being offered, to make good use of it in the existing structures. Now, at the moment, I say there's more assimilation going on than accommodation. That is, the BBC is not being fundamentally changed by the user-generated content it is absorbing. It's, by and large, putting up on the website or feeding it into the news process. But it's not radically rethinking its journalistic practices in any substantial way. And one of the questions is whether that rethinking is going to be called for at all, or whether what may be a revolution is just going to peter out and won't actually have that much impact. I mean, the BBC started inviting viewers to send photographs in back in, it was March 2003. So they've been doing it for quite a while and they're quite experienced of it. with it. Those go into an editorial system where they are assessed. Very few of the existing mainstream news organizations allow unmediated access to their websites, certainly not to their print product, by visitors to the site. So comment boards and stuff like that are read, they are edited down. Apparently the BBC got 35,000 emails and postings the day John Peel died, and they posted about 50 of them. Everyone was read, apparently, and they picked out the ones they want. So they're getting vast numbers in, but they're not just automatically allowing those to go online. And I think that says something about the way news organisations are thinking about the content they're getting. However, it's not just about how existing news organisations care to deal with this phenomenon. And one of the exciting things is how much you can do it for yourself. And what's happened, as we all have observed over the last few years, is the technology just got so much easier. I mean, I presume, how many people here actually have a weblog of their own that they build themselves and manage? Okay, so some of us. If you wanted one, as you all know, it's very simple to get one. You no longer need any technical skill. If you are a sad geek, because I suspect the four of us who put our hands up are, then you run your own server and handcraft your own code and just can't stay away from tweaking the templates. But you don't actually have to do that. You can just sign up for an account and make it happen. But other things matter too. The ease of net access, the availability of digital imaging systems, so digital cameras, digital video cameras, have come down in price so much, are so easy to use. Increased bandwidth, so it's no longer a problem to post those images, and ease of, well, both ubiquitous computing and ubiquitous connectivity. So, you know, there's very little time in the day when I'm not within easy reach of a computer and an internet connection. Now, I carry my laptop around with me anyway, I just do, and by and large you can pick up illegal but free wireless connection in a lot of surprising places, I have discovered. Not, though, the House of Commons yet, though I still carry on looking. And of course the writing and posting tools got a lot easier. Now, the ease of publishing, the ease with which people could get their stuff online, wouldn't have had much impact if it hadn't been for the parallel development of the aggregation and search services that allowed those sites that people were writing to create an audience or to get an audience. Essentially, the news aggregators, the early experiments with RSS and other forms of syndication, and the fact that Google particularly was indexing all of these, allowed audiences to coalesce around certain sites. And there, I think, you saw a threshold effect, where it reached the point where the mainstream media, both on and offline, noticed what was happening and started to write about it and comment on it. And that amplification effect meant that more people were aware that these sites existed. They went to the sites. It was getting easier to do your own stuff, so more people started doing it and were able to get an audience, which created an expanding phenomenon that the mainstream media would want to write about. And so we've had this self-reinforcing loop going on for at least the last 3 years, maybe the last 4 years. And the question, and I do not have an answer to this, is whether this is just hype and a bubble, which will eventually burst, or whether something really new is being created here. And that, I think, we'll only know when the current generation, particularly of webloggers, have had long enough to do it to get bored with it, to realize it doesn't make them very much money, it doesn't actually get them very much fame or influence. And if people persist, then there is a chance it will continue. But I think there's also a possibility that it will actually die back again. Certainly in terms of the blogging that is attempting to shape news agendas, is commenting on current events, is more than just a personal diary and reflections. And I don't think it's at all guaranteed that in 3 or 4 years' time, they will still be there in the same way, or they will be considered worthy of note. Again, this is something other people may have different views on this. This is, I don't know where it's going to go. It's interesting that Yahoo's just employed Kevin Stiles and given him a laptop and a budget and sent him off to all 150 of the world's major trouble spots to go and report them. Now, if I was keen and 19, I'd get his itinerary, my own laptop, and get there before him to every one and blog Kevin, blog him. because that would get some attention and that would actually be interesting. But I have commitments, so I probably won't bother. So there is a lot happening as more and more people get online, and we see different responses to it. We see different responses in mainstream media and also in terms of how people are absorbing news. And what I want to ask and perhaps talk about a bit now, so stop talking for a while and then come back to some of the other points, is what is actually going on. Because there seem to be a number of possibilities. One is that this is a real sort of discontinuity, that we're seeing a step change in the practice of journalism, that mainstream media are to some extent on their way out, and this is part of that process. So the dinosaurs are looking up, and the blogosphere is an approaching comet, that sort of model. And some people have even become hysterical enough to use the term paradigm shift, but I will of course put that in sneer quotes. Is it a new emergent phenomenon that runs in parallel to new media, to existing media rather? So is it something which will stand alone, that it won't actually affect the existing world that much? And that raises the question of whether what we've got are smart mobs or dumb crowds. And whether something interesting will emerge for this, or whether it will actually be a dumbing down of the media. More sneer quotes, because I can't use the phrase tipping point without feeling slightly soiled. But is it one of them? Is it a new ecosystem? That's another term that's used quite a lot, although some people prefer to have a niche in the ecosystem. Or is it just a bandwagon that various people are jumping on for personal advancement in a world they don't really understand, and which organisations like the BBC, The Guardian, Gillmor's blog, OhmyNews have jumped on because they see advantage to themselves in it, but which they will jump off again just as much if it begins to stutter and fall. So one thing it'd be nice to do is just sort of discuss these questions. Then I have done some more I have prepared some material about the impact it has on me as a journalist and the way I think it's affecting journalism training, which I'd like to come back to. Carry on a little bit with what I was going to talk about, because it's about sort of the impact on the practice of journalism on sort of working journalists, and also about what we're doing to the people whose stuff we're taking. So perhaps I can talk a bit more and then we can resume this discussion. Good. Excellent. Okay, in which case, thinking about it as a working journalist, there are a number of things which I rather like about what's happening online and in the online world. The first is that people are, as they put it, fact-checking my ass. And so it's much harder for me to get away with that sort of journalistic sleight of hand that makes writing columns so easy. If I want to reference something or sort of use a quote or whatever, I better know where it came from, and I better be able to back it up. And so the times when you're writing something and you can't find the thing that you vaguely remember, now you will write around it. You will not trust that your readers will assume that you know what you're doing, because you know there'll always be one who realizes you don't know what you're doing and comes after you. And it can be embarrassing, as has happened to me in the past. So it's upped my game. The other thing is that I certainly find is direct engagement with the people who are reading or listening to my stuff. I do a weekly radio show on the World Service, and it's great to get sort of emails or contact from people from around the world, either sort of coming to me via email or comments on my weblog about what we've been talking about, sort of asking for more information, commenting on it, telling me things I didn't know. When I wrote for The Guardian newspaper in the 1990s, in 5 years I got one letter. That was it, and it was such nice to get a letter. Once sort of email became much more common among the readers, and once people started realizing they could find my email address very easily, I now get 20 or 30, well, probably 20 or 30 a week, just of comments and stuff coming back from things I've written. And that is really nice. That also indirectly encourages humility. And journalists aren't very good at being humble. But it's the humility of acknowledging the sources, the places we got the information, the research that we build on, the experts we might have talked to. It makes it, for me certainly, that I will not, sort of again, the sleight of hand, I will not claim credit for insights that were not mine. Because, I don't want to do that anyway, but often within an article you will, because in writing it can be easier just to allow something to be expressed as your thought, instead of having to construct a paragraph in a way that makes it clear who you took this idea from. I'm much more likely to take the effort to do that now, because I know that somebody, possibly even the person I talked to at that party, will be reading it and again can get back to me. The wider distribution and the easier contact sort of makes that happen. So overall, I think the benefits for the working journalist, sort of people like me, are very positive. There is the problem which we identified, we talked about earlier, that because, which Bill mentioned, because there are now so many other sources of news and information, it's not clear what the special privileged position of, say, the BBC News website is anymore, if other people can have more direct access. I think that particularly becomes clear when you look at stuff like, say, reporting of this week's UN summit, where the short, 800,000-word articles trying to encompass what's been happening at the summit don't really give you a good enough detailed sense of what's happening. In fact, you're better off going to the UN website and looking at transcripts, at looking at webcasts, at going directly to the source. Now, we know this is something which is manipulated by companies sometimes because they realize they can get round the journalist's perspective by offering material directly to sort of end users, to readers, whatever. But the fact is that quite often the process of condensing something for distribution to a necessarily general audience means that so much of the detail is lost, you are better off going back to the original. And I think that forces many of us as journalists to ask sometimes, is what we're doing actually worth doing? Is writing this report a sensible thing to do? What is actually being contributed other than the fact that my editor can tick the box to say, yes, we covered this? And that may well be something which sort of we want to return to. What is the point of a lot of the mainstream media coverage of stuff which you can find out about just as easily, either directly or through people who were more directly involved? But one of the issues that I think has not been adequately faced are the downsides for contributors, both those who provide content to a place like the BBC or those who are blogging themselves. And unfortunately, far too often, if you talk about this, you're dismissed as being another threatened mainstream hack. Okay, so I'm happy to be dismissed as being just another threatened mainstream hack. But once you become a contributor, once you start a news-oriented weblog or put your photos up on Flickr or send stuff into the BBC, then you stop being like just a civilian, you become a player in a news machine, and that exposes you in certain ways. And I think there are 4 major issues. The first is there can be physical danger. I think a lot of the sort of requests for information around what happened with Katrina, some of them overstepped the mark in terms of encouraging people to put themselves in real physical danger, to take photos or videos or report on what's happening outside and stuff like that. And I don't think enough consideration was taken. And I think even people who weren't encouraged to put themselves in danger may well have done so just because they were blogging about it or wanted a good photo and realised that there is a marketplace, there would have been interest in it. A great photo of the roof of your house being ripped off, would definitely attract interest, be picked up on blog lines and places like that, but it could get you killed. And I think we need to make people more aware of that. There's also what I like to call moral danger, which is just of people knowing more about you than you might be comfortable with, of putting together the pieces of your life, or of making fun of you. I mean, this can be sort of slightly absurd. Do any of you remember the Star Wars lightsaber playing boy whose life was basically ruined by the circulation of a video of him playing with his lightsaber? I mean, that was unfortunate, and he didn't put it up deliberately. But also, I think people who blog, who talk about their lives, whatever, could be exposed to ridicule. Also, increasingly, could find that stuff they've written a few years back comes back to haunt them when they go for job applications or get into relationships and things like that. And I think people don't realise. I'm very aware of this for two reasons. The first is a conversation I had some years ago with Tim Berners-Lee when he'd just taken down his personal webpage. And he said basically he didn't want it to be up there. He didn't want his family to be exposed to the people who might be looking at it, or to know, to be able to put together the pieces of his life. He was having to be a public figure, but he was not going to share stuff about himself as an individual online anymore. And it's something I'm aware of because I exploit my children mercilessly in what I write and talk about, because my daughter's 14, my son's 12, they are brilliant case studies in growing up in the digital generation. And because they've been exposed to all of this technology from a very early age, thanks to me being their father, they're really useful. I value their insights. And I try very hard to talk about them in a way that does not expose them. But I wonder sometimes if I do cross the line. So I don't put photos of them up and on my Flickr feed. Photos of them are for family only and stuff like that. But now that Lily's 14 and is establishing her own online presence, it may well be that some connection which I'm not aware of will be made between her online life and mine that will actually sort of expose her. And it's something to worry about. I think there's also the financial danger of the fact that the BBC won't pay you for your photos. And although they kindly say that you're allowed to exploit them yourself, most people don't have the capability to do that. And also, once the photo's been up and circulated around, its value diminishes. And I think there's a real issue there about people who spend a lot of time and effort doing this. And perhaps it goes two ways. It's depressing for me as a journalist who likes to get paid to see people doing this stuff quite well for nothing. I think it undervalues, so it cuts the going rate for what I do. It's also quite worrying to see people who perhaps could be paid not know that this is a possibility. This is about the amateur-professional distinction. And then there's also the legal dangers that you place yourself in. So if you submit a photo to CNN for them to use, as part of the submission process, you tick a little box on their site which indemnifies them against any liability. You have to pay the lawyer's costs when they get sued for their use of your photo. And this is not a good thing, because their lawyers are probably quite expensive. And people don't realise this. So there's an issue where if these people are journalists, we need to help them. We need to make them aware of things like the NUJ Code of Conduct, which I brought along with me, which I thought I brought along with me. Yes. I'm a member of the National Union of Journalists. We have a code of conduct for things we should do. A journalist has a duty to maintain the highest professional and ethical standards, it begins. And I know that the profession's not held in very high regard by many people, although I would point out, just as a point of information, that whenever you see those reports saying only 18% of people think journalists are any good, the word missed out is tabloid journalists. And in fact, it's different for different sorts of journalists. And journalists from the BBC are held in very high regard. So there. We need to help them. Not the BBC. And I wonder whether there is scope within what we're doing for a mentoring approach. We've seen a lot of websites which claim to be fact-checking the BBC, and Robert Fisk at The Independent has been taken apart by many webloggers, particularly on the sort of Christian right in the US for some years now. But maybe we as working journalists should be thinking about adopting a blogger, somebody whose site we look at, who we offer advice to and support to, who when they get it wrong, we say, look, you've actually just libeled someone there. You might like to take that posting down. And essentially give them the benefit of our professional experience, help them understand more about what we do as journalists, and perhaps help them do a better job. Because fundamentally, I think if somebody wants to be a journalist, then they are a journalist. Okay? There are no barriers to entry. They can't be bad and flawed and biased and illiterate and wrong-headed and inaccurate. That's fine. They're still journalists. Okay? There's not a quality threshold. There is an intention threshold. So for me, journalism is writing for publication. So it's writing stuff which you intend to have an audience. And that's probably about the only criteria you can reasonably apply. Once you start trying to apply any other criteria, once you try saying this isn't journalism, then you start down the path that leads to registered journalists. Say who counts as a journalist and who doesn't. And I really resist that. I think one of the strengths of the term citizen journalism, and also one of the failures of the term, is we are all citizen journalists, in that I'm just an ordinary person with no legal privileges who just shoves my nose into stuff and writes about what I find interesting. Now, I do that within a structure and according to a code of conduct that I've voluntarily signed up to. But there's no fundamental difference between being a working professional journalist and being an amateur journalist in terms of the end point. And I think that if you try to make that distinction, you get very quickly into trouble. So as a journalist, I write what I believe to be true. I do it for the benefit of others, and I try to make information on current events part of wider public knowledge. And that's about all that you need to do in order to count. One problem, however, is that there's a big difference between, say, reportage and eyewitness. There's a difference between reporting and testimony. And a lot of the confusion that we see, and a lot of the criticism that I think comes from people like me about what's happening, say, in the blogosphere, is far too much of it is testimony. It's someone writing about what they have seen. And I think what happened with the Menezes shooting in Stockwell Tube demonstrates quite clearly why eyewitness testimony is not enough. That there were people coming out of that tube station, talking on the radio and television, saying how they had seen him running down the stairs, jumping over the barrier, onto the platform, onto the train, trip over, wearing a bulky jacket with wires protruding from it, when he was jumped on by a policeman who shot him in the head. None of those things happened. Not one of them. Right? And this was eyewitness testimony. If these people had all been bloggers and gone out and written it, then they would be massively criticised. The fact that they were eyewitnesses who were interviewed by Sky and the BBC and CNN and the Daily Mail and reported means not too much fuss had been made about it. But I think it should all give us all pause for thought. Reporting is not the same as just writing what you saw. It's about putting things in context. It's about talking to different people, getting different points of view, looking for inconsistencies, looking for evidence to back things up, checking sources, asking difficult questions, and coming up with something which you believe reflects reality. But most reporters are not eyewitnesses to what they report, unless it's something stage managed, in which case it's hardly worth reporting anyway, as I said earlier. So I'm very happy to include these people as journalists, as long as they accept that journalism is not the same as just writing about your life or reporting on what you've seen. And again, this may be something that you think is sort of debatable, so I'd be happy to talk about that when we have questions. So just to finish, because I don't want to spend all the time talking, I want to make a couple of points about journalism as a profession, and then I want to talk a bit about what I think is the wider and in fact more interesting impact of all of this citizen journalism stuff on the development of the internet as a whole. So the first thing is sort of what I think we should do, what I think we as journalists generally should get up to. The first thing is, I think that any of us who work in the news industry, news gathering or whatever, should embrace our new colleagues and not be negative about it. That they are, the new news gatherers. We don't try to restrict the practice of journalism. We accept what they do. We let everyone in, and we don't ask for credentials or any form of registration, and we allow bad journalism to count too. But we point it out as bad journalism. So we don't say this doesn't count as journalism because it is biased and opinionated and reflects a particular point of view. Otherwise, many newspaper columns would not be allowed through the barrier. We criticise in a supportive way and try to improve the quality. We recognise, as I said, that reporting is not the same as testimony. And we also, I think particularly here in the UK, should be thinking about extending the idea of media literacy, which is something that Ofcom is very keen on at the moment, to cover the generation of material as well as its consumption. That media literacy should be about knowing how the practice works, not just knowing how to critique what you are presented with as a passive observer. I think if we do those things, if we allow a great deal of sort of flexibility in the definition, if we allow this stuff to come in, then we will all be better off. But as I indicated, I think the real importance of citizen journalism, whatever we call it, isn't actually going to be on journalism itself. We're a relatively small industry. It doesn't really matter that much what happens to us in terms of individuals. But I think there's something very big happening with the internet as a whole over the next few years. And I suspect that good support for citizen journalism initiatives is going to turn into one of the ways in which we resist moving from an open internet to a closed internet. Because online journalism, citizen journalism, gives people a good reason to go to non-corporate websites. It gives them a reason to get away from the top 10 major properties from Yahoo and MSN and Google and places like that. And it could help reduce the dominance of those major players in people's bookmarks. It will enhance the importance of aggregators, which may or may not be a good thing. But those aggregators will have to improve their game in terms of finding relevant content. So I'm not too sure what to make of Google's blog search, which was launched this week. I think on balance I welcome it, because it will make it easier for somebody who's writing a blog to be found by people who might have an interest in the things they're talking about. The other thing that it does, that this sort of pressure or this move towards user-generated content does, is provides a driver for content creation by everybody, even the people who don't want to do journalism. Because the tools are being made and they're being improved. So stuff like what's happening on Bayosphere, the blogging platforms and places like that, all those tools being built by the hackers to support citizen journalism are available to everyone else. So when Flickr, as it undoubtedly will, launches some sort of news event special service, where you can post, specifically post pictures about an event, there will be nothing to stop me creating a news event for my daughter's birthday party and posting my stuff there using the content creation, aggregation and dissemination tools that have been created for a very different purpose, just to support my family. And so it will encourage people to be creators of content, even stuff they don't want to count as journalism. And this will encourage what I call the three chords in the guitar model, the punk model of publishing. I think that is deeply, deeply important. That publishing should be easy. Anyone should feel they can do it. And of course that, just by itself, will increase pressure on internet service providers to retain the two-way sort of internet that we have. Because if you're publishing a lot of content, then having a very restricted upwards channel, even if you've got 8 megabits coming into your house, is not going to be good enough for you. Once you start noticing that posting those videos or putting those photos up on Flickr is taking a long time, then it will be harder for ISPs to get away with building the asymmetric internet or foisting it on us. And of course, it will retain the pressure on governments to keep our online freedoms. Because the more people who benefit directly from the freedom to publish what you want, the fact you don't have to be licensed to have a website, the fact, those sort of things, the more people who are publishing content, the harder it will be to introduce those measures. And I think, in fact, that resistance to sign up and registration on websites, resistance to things like DRM protected content may well come from people who want to be able to publish freely and don't welcome the fact that many of the tools, the new tools that are coming down the line, have those sort of protection measures built in. So I think overall, citizen journalism promotes people's creativity online, and that is actually good for the internet. Of course, it's going to increase the upward pressure on bandwidth and storage as well, And that's going to help protect things like BitTorrent from being legislated out of existence. Again, once people start wanting to put up their own large files to distribute their home movies, and they realize that they can't just put a file on their little bit of network space they got from their ISP or on their home PC, then the pressure for real content distribution over peer-to-peer networks for BitTorrent and stuff like that will become irresistible. And any attempts to control it, any attempts to make it illegal, will be resisted. So I think that will also be a good thing. It will make it hard to legislate against enabling technologies for user-generated content. So it's about the people, in a sense, taking the internet back from the corporations and the bad law that is currently being constructed around it, and resisting the technical and the legal measures which would leave control out of their own hands. So whatever the impact on media corporations, whatever it does to the BBC and the Guardian and CNN and Sky, I think that's actually less important than what it's going to do for the internet as a whole, which is keep it what it should be, which is a network for everyone, where everybody is equal once they've got an IP address. And that's the real phenomenon that I want to see happening over the next 5 years. And that's the thing that I would like to sort of talk a bit about, because making sure that happens is obviously up for discussion. So that's what I want to say. So I'd like to see sort of pick apart some of those ideas. Thanks.
Well, Vicky's out of the room.